The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, and welcome to the ALCTS webinar on Data Visualization Part 2 Tools. This is the second webinar in our two-part series on data visualization. I'm Erin Elsie, a member of the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. Our presenter today is Reed Jones. Reed works for the University at Buffalo in the University Libraries Annex. He has both an interest in and experience with database architecture, reporting, analytics, and data visualization with a focus on fulfillment, delivery, and access statistics. He holds an MA in History and an MS in Information and Library Science from the University at Buffalo. Reed brings much expertise to today's topic, and we are fortunate to have him with us today. A few logistics for today's presentation. All attendees are muted to prevent background noise, and we do not have interactive chat capabilities. You may, however, comment on today's presentation using Twitter. The hashtag is ALCTSCE. We do not monitor the Twitter feed, so if you have questions for Reed, please type them into the question box on your screen. We will have time for Q&A after the presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive an email with links to the recording and presentation slides shortly after the presentation concludes. And now we'll turn it over to Reed. There will be a slight delay as we change presenters.
All right, hello everybody, and welcome again if you're here for the part 2 and we're here for part 1. This is my introduction to data visualization part 2, focusing on tools and softwares that are used in data visualization. So we want to kind of build on what we learned in the first part and now look at tools and see how we can use the skills that we have in these tools to create these visualizations. So before I started, I wanted to give an overview of how this is structured. So we're going to look at 7 different tools that do different things for data visualization. This is by no means a comprehensive list of the available data visualization tools. I ended up picking 7 different tools to highlight 7 different aspects and different types of data visualization tools that you may come across. I picked the ones that I thought were the best for those situations upon what I was able to test. I want to go through and give you an explanation of what criteria I used for testing this. I tried to keep everything testing the same criteria so that I could get a base understanding of the pros and cons of each of these tools. And then I'll go through and tell you what I liked about it, what I thought was really interesting and good, and what was specifically helpful for that tool, and some of the things that were either frustrating or I just didn't like about the atmosphere or design of it. At the end, I'll go through and wrap it up and kind of give you a discussion about what I thought were the best tools, and then also why I picked the ones that I picked to show you and how they can best be applied to data visualization. In addition, as I go through them, I added time to give demonstrations of 3 specific tools. I'll use Excel, I'll use Tableau, and I'll also use Google Data Studio. I think this will give a good complement to what we did last week when we were learning about the tools, to kind of see how those environments work, how they're similar, how they're different, and how you can get the same visualizations off a couple of tools. The other ones that I will bring up, I will show some examples of and explain my process of using my criteria through them. But I wanted to spend more time using those 3 tools because they give a good base for you to see how data visualization works in a lot of different types of tools. So let me stop briefly before I get into the tools to tell you what my criteria for selection was. I wanted to basically pick a few options that showed how successful they could be with the set parameters I wanted to give them. My criteria for testing these tools, so the graph I wanted to create was figuring out, based on the sample data that we distributed last week, the average cost per completion of digitizing objects based on employee. So then after I had that basic visualization, I wanted to see how well I could filter the results using other dimensions. I wanted to see if I could split the analysis into different pages showing different things, and also figure out how easily I could actually share these results. So using that, I kind of came up with my pros and cons of doing it, and I will tell you if I was successful or not with these tools. So the first tool I wanted to show you was Excel. We used this last week in our sample data and what I use as my demonstration. And there's a good reason for that, at least in my opinion. It's a great tool that is a great gateway to getting into data from all stages of data, from input, from validation, from curation, and then expression and visualization. It's usually seen as just a spreadsheet, and you think of it with the limitations of its 1,064,000 rows that you can do, but because it has data connection capabilities, it can do so much more than you would typically think it could do. And I think because it's so widely used, it's one of the great tools to really get into data visualization off the front. So that kind of goes into why I think we should use data visualization. So it integrates with data from almost anywhere. You can go into the data tab and make a connection to access a bunch of different CSV files and things like that. But you can also connect to server data as long as you have the links to it. And that's really helpful when you're trying to bring in gigantic sets of data and turn it into smaller reports that you can work with. I like it because it's a familiar setting. A lot of people who have dealt with data are used to using Excel in some capacity. So at least for navigation purposes, you will be able to kind of figure out where to go faster than with most other tools. I really like the calculation tools in Excel. They're very quick and efficient, and they really help for when you're pulling data to make your data render really quickly. And the thing I think that's really powerful about it is it's very rare that you can find a question that you have with Excel that you can't get an answer to. There are so many users of Excel, and the community is really great at building just these great repositories of answers and answering questions that you have yourself. Excel does have a couple downsides. It's extremely difficult to master. And it requires to do a lot of the higher level stuff, understanding the Visual Basic and some other programming languages. When you're doing high level dashboard creation and you're trying to create applications based off the dashboards that you're using, this is where you start to see that it gets very difficult. And this is a stage that I'm in, and I'm kind of bouncing between Tableau and Excel because of the knowledge base that it requires to do a lot of the things. It's not very easy to publish charts online. There are plenty of resources on how to do it, but it is not a simple just upload and publish type of functionality. So now I want to go into kind of giving an example of how I use Excel to create these charts by going through the criteria that we used last time, and I'll show you exactly what I mean with its functionality again. So this will be kind of a repeat of the example I gave last time. So I'm going to start off by creating a new sheet, and then I want to go in and insert, and I'll insert a pivot chart. My reasons for using pivot charts is because they're interactive and they allow you to mess around with them instead of just creating a standard chart. So then you go back to the sheet that you want to use, and you select the area that you want to take the data from, and you press OK. So what I wanted to figure out was, by employee, what is the cost at $10 per hour? And bear with me a second, I just have to move something really quick. All right, so that's our base graph that we wanted. So it's hit part one. We can now see the average cost or the costs based on employee. But what we notice right here is this is giving us a sum, not an average. So you always want to make sure that you're actually getting the right count, and you need to change the actual value type to average. So this will give you a better indication. So now we can see by employee who's actually the most efficient, cost effective employee. And this will give us a little bit of information. But what if we want to dig deeper? I noticed that I have two different types of scanners. I wonder if that makes a difference. So there's a couple of different ways to do this. So we can either put it into the legend and sorry about that. Let me just remove that real quick because it didn't do what I wanted it to. I will put that back in, put it at average. And then we want to take the scanner and drop it into the legend. So now we can see, based on scanners, not only which employees are more efficient at scanning per item, but if there's a difference between the type of scanner used. I like using it this way sometimes because it gives you a direct comparison. You can also insert what is known as a slicer, and this is a way to make different pages that your users can interact with. So if I insert a slicer and I use it by scanner, then I have two selection options. So this is going to give me both. If I click on Edge, I just get the information for the Edge scanner. If I click on I only get the information for the eye scanner, so you can see it dynamically changes. The one weird thing, and if you're going to have this be a user interface, you have to remind them that to get both, you have to click Control on the one that is not selected, and then it'll get both again. So this is how you would go about kind of messing around with a visualization in Excel on a pretty basic level to achieve what we wanted to through the criteria. So did it pass my test? Yes, it does. There's plenty of other things you can do to those graphs, but I kind of wanted to show you that you can make a basic visualization pretty easily, and then the more you manipulate it, the more information you may be able to get out of it. And so this hits a lot of the criteria that I want in a visualization software. What I did mention before, though, for the connectivity, it's very easy to get a graph from Excel into a document. Getting it online is much more difficult, though it is doable. So it can pass the test, but it does take a lot of know-how, and you might need expertise to get to that stage. And also, you can't make a dynamic graph on PDF files. The next one that I wanted to talk about is Tableau. Tableau is what I primarily use for my work, and I really enjoy it because it's one of the most intuitive products I've come across. It really makes data visualization kind of make sense. So the learning process is not too bad. And this is balanced with, it's got a ton of functionality, and it's clever and just it's a good resource. So like I said, it's intuitive, so it's relatively easy to learn. And if you don't know something, there's a lot of support resources. It's almost as extensive as Excel. I've had a ton of my questions figured out just by using the forums or any resources available. Tableau has videos that are very helpful in getting you off the ground and running. What I really like about it, and since I've been using it for about a year and a half, there's been so many updates to its functionality that usually if I have a problem with something not working, it'll get fixed in the next update. It's very easy to publish your results online, and you can also print these to PDF. So you could have two different types of, you can have a static form, or you can publish yours online to have people interact with. And it can update live. And the coolest functionality I think it has is its ability to blend data from multiple sources. It's instead of what a typical left join would do, where it can give you data that might repeat if you have one identification, but it has two different classifications in another field, it'll duplicate that row. What blending data will do will kind of shrink that together and then give you asterisks where multiple data sources might be in that field for that ID, which is a much nicer and easier way to see the data. The biggest downside to Tableau is it's extremely expensive to use for what it is. I mean, it's a great tool, but for individual user, it's $70 per month. And on the enterprise level, it depends on what your needs are, but it is still pretty expensive. There's another trade-off, and this is getting better with each update. There's functionality versus ease of use. Sometimes when I'm doing very specific things with my data, I noticed this when I was trying to do like timestamp data and trying to convert that into averages. It was a much more difficult process because they hide the more advanced features behind a lot of things that are very easy to drag and drop. So it's got a little bit of an issue with that, and there's a couple of things that I've found that although they probably are possible to do, it has taken me a lot of time either to try and figure out a workaround, or I have just tried to remake my visualization to do a different thing. So one of the things I have a big problem with is using filters that draw from more than one field at a time. Which is something I could do writing SQL, but when you've already built a visualization, there's not a simple way to import SQL on top of that to do a further filter. You have to kind of go back to the data and think ahead of time and build the filter you want in a new field beforehand. So sometimes that's a problem. But what I want to do now is show you what Tableau looks like. And I'm using the Tableau public, which is free to download and try. It has reduced functionality. But you can still publish to your Tableau public server. But the connections are not as robust as the full Tableau, but the interface itself looks the same. So I've already connected to my data, and it shows you right on the front screen when you're connecting to your data what you want to do. There's different types of options. I connected to a Excel sheet, and that's one of the options. One of the more recent updates allows you now to connect to Google Sheets, which is really nice. I really enjoy this data interpreter thing because it tries to do cleanup ahead of time to tell you to look for any errors, and it usually fixes things before you have to deal with it. I really haven't had many problems with it. So I took our sample data that we used and I just brought it into Tableau. So if you were dealing with multiple tables, you could do joins right here. So it'll give you the left, inner, or right joins that you would see in a database. And you would have to go in and pick the identifiers that would be the matching identifiers between the two tables. So once you have that all set up, you can go in and actually mess with your sheets. And that's the term they use. So I'm going to create a new worksheet. And as you can see, everything's kind of come through, and it's really nice because they already come in and divide the dimensions into one section and the measures into another. So it makes it very easy to kind of figure out where you're going. So what we want to do is we want to figure out the average cost per employee. So first, our columns are employees. And this is really nice because instead of using like X and Y axis or anything like that, it tells you exactly visually where that's going to fall. So everything under A is going to be in a column, everything under B, a column. All right, and then we want to figure out the cost at $10 an hour. All right, and once again, just like in Excel, it went straight to sum instead of average. So you can change that in the same way, turn it into average, and now we have a basic visual that we can mess around with. So now what we can do is we can figure it out by scanner. So how about we start off by using it as a page. So as you can see in this upper right-hand corner, now we can switch between the different types of scanners and see what the difference is in cost. And you can tell right there, based on the change, there is a significant difference. But sometimes that's not the most indicative one. So what if we put it into the columns? That's okay. We can now see that there is a difference between the eye and edge, but it's not visually pleasing enough. One thing you can also do is once you've already put something into the columns, you can go into these marker areas where they further designate and differentiate. So I just dragged it and dropped it into this color field, and now you can see much easier where the differences are and what's going on. So I think this is probably the easiest of all the tools to get used to and get running, but you do have to factor in the cost that it takes to use it, and I would recommend having a good data plan if you're going to get Tableau to actually maximize the use out of it. All right. So did it pass my test? Yes, it did. I think it's a very powerful tool, and I really like it. And I also encourage you to check out the tool that I had that it beat out just slightly is Microsoft Power BI, because it does a very good job of this stuff. So the similar stuff. It's got a very good layout and pretty intuitive. It's a little bit more like Excel than it is Tableau, but it's also relatively easy to use. It's also cheaper. The per user cost I think is $10 a month as opposed to 70. But I don't think it's as complete a product as Tableau. And depending on your data usage, I would do some more research, but Microsoft Power BI is also a good option if you would like to check it out. So the next one I want to talk about is Google Sheets, and more importantly, Google Data Studio. This was probably the most surprising product that I came across, and I really do like it a lot. I was stunned by what you can do with it. And Google seems to do a lot of really great stuff and just kind of do it under the radar. So to me, this was a really cool thing to find, and it's free to use. So what I like about Google Data Studio is they took a lot of the good things about Excel and Tableau and tried to make their own intuitive design that kind of looks like both of them and gives you an environment where if you know one, you can use the other. Like I said, it's free, so you can try it out, and it links to your data in your Google Drives. It's pretty easy to get the visuals up and running. I would say it's not quite as easy as Tableau, and it also might be a little more challenging for reasons I'll talk about in the next slide than Excel, but it's still a really great tool. And the fact that it's free as opposed to Excel or Tableau, where you do have to have some type of cost associated with it, it's a really cool tool. So possible downsides, it's not really in beta, but it has a lot of like add-ons and stuff that are still in lab testing. And when you play around with it, you'll kind of notice where the glitches happen. And this is one of the factors in why I'd say it's not as easy to use as some of the other products that we've, like Tableau and Excel that I've talked about. So it doesn't connect to all data sources or most data sources. It connects with its partners, and it connects with CSV files. And so this includes like any MySQL server you can connect to. But what I will say is there's a community of people that are doing open source connectors that are making it more able to connect with more and more data point sources. So because it's relatively new, I mean, it's been around for at least 2 years. It probably will get better. But the other thing to consider is Google has a history of getting rid of things that they've built if it no longer serves a purpose to them. So it might not be a good permanent solution. And it's not easy to back up the work that you've done outside of Google. So you don't really have a backup option if it goes away. So knowing that it could be a temporary thing is good to prepare yourself for, and try and make workarounds around it in case the worst case scenario happens and it goes away. But I feel relatively confident that they will want to keep this or subtype of Google Analytics going for a while because they've invested a lot in their analytics and AI side of things. So this is the last one I really wanted to demo for you. I want to show you kind of what it looks like and why I was really excited to use it. And bear with me on the technical issues that I've come across with it because it's more of a clicking problem than anything. So right now I have pre-built one and I'll show you how I built this. So this is connected to the same data that we used via, I saved it as a CSV file and I got rid of some of the columns. And this is an important point. Data cleanup is a little bit more intensive using Google Data Studio than it would be with Excel or with Tableau because when you change things to CSV, sometimes you get errors and it'll tell you when it's uploading if there are errors, and you might have to go around and figure out what's going on and just kind of think ahead about what you actually need and how can I format it in the easiest possible way. So if you have currency, change it just to a basic number so you can get the things to compute the correct way. So we're going to go back to a bar chart. And what this Data Studio does is it gives you a template to make basically a dashboard. So you're kind of giving it the layout ahead of time of what size you want the graph to be. So you can do multiple graphs on the same template. So this is a great way to make a dashboard interactive for your users. So now we want to go through and run it through the same criteria. So first thing we wanted to do was we wanted to get employees as the dimension. All right, I want to get rid of scanner. And so now I have the employees up. This is an important note to make. So if you already have a metric or one dimension or one metric, you cannot remove it until you've added another, which is kind of weird and quirky, but it still works. It just takes some time to get used to. All right, so once again, I've got employees and the cost at $10 an hour. Just like the last two examples, it defaults to sum. All you have to do is click on that and change it to average, and you're good. All right, so now say I want to figure out about what scanner, what's the difference between scanners. I'm gonna drop it into dimension just to see what that does. And now see it already defaults to two different colors and gives you a representation of the average cost by scanner by employee, which is a really good way. But you can also turn it into pages. So I'll get rid of it there, and now I'll have it so it can be an interactive, what's called a filter control. I have that pop up. And now what I can do is have that filter control be scanner. And unfortunately, you can't interact with it when you're in edit mode, but if you switch to view mode, now you can see just the edge. Just the eye, or both. So like I said, I mean, this is a free tool and I was able to do everything I wanted to and figure it out relatively easily. The biggest problems I have with it are some of the quirkiness of how to add and remove things. Sometimes when I'm clicking on specific things that I want and using a drag down menu, it'll just go away. But that's more of just an interface problem, and it should be fixed over time if this keeps being like a high use tool. And you can go into Google Data Studios and check how often they update and what they do each update. And it's pretty impressive how often they go in and try and add to this software. So did it pass my test? Yes, and I do want to give you the caveat that it is kind of weird because of the just glitchiness of clicking around and making things work in it. And also the data cleanups that's needed to make it work initially is something that you have to factor in when you're using it as a tool. So it will take a little bit longer as opposed to Tableau to get something up and running, or Excel. The next one I wanted to talk about is Datawrapper. This is an interesting tool because it's completely web-based, and it's really just a way to copy data that you have and have a internet tool pump out a graph for you without any interaction on your, or very minimal interaction on your part. It's a tool that was built in Germany for journalists who need to make visualizations quickly for all of their columns. So it's built with speed in mind. I think it's a really cool tool if you already have good data and you've created a report and you know you just need a visual, and you just you have it all lined up correctly. And I also like it because it's free to use, and as long as your chart is displayed and only gets up to 10,000 chart views before you have to go into a paid account or a paid subscription for it. So if you have charts that you need to show off for a little bit of time and have people see it, you can bring that up really quick on the web and have it viewable and interactive, and then you can bring it down and use a new chart. So it's not something that's good for permanent usage unless you want to pay for it, which I don't think I would recommend because there are better tools that you could do a lot more with. But it's a good way to get a quick graph out and get it going online. One of my biggest problems, it doesn't really scale with big data. It's really good for small data sets and just quick graphs. The fact that it's built to just be drop in and have it build your graph, it can be frustrating if it's not giving you the visuals that you expected. And it's not a dynamic solution. It doesn't like use live data, but you can still interact with it. It'll have you, the user, able to hover over data points and see what's going on that data point and things like that. So let's look at basically my experience with it. On the right, you could see kind of the graph I was able to get based on my criteria, and that's nothing like what we've seen in the past three, though all the information is there. And I guess one of the biggest problems I had is I couldn't really group things together, so I couldn't have all of the A's grouped together in one average. I couldn't really do measures on top of it. So I don't recommend it as a tool for actually manipulating the data. I would recommend it as a tool when you are already done with your data, you have just simple things you want to get across as a graph, and you already have the final values that you want. Then you should use something like Datawrapper. There's another and possibly and arguably more interactive version of this called Raw, and that's free to use. The reason I didn't list it is because I had difficulty getting the graphs to do what they were supposed to do regardless of the data I put in. So while you might get more options, I think there's more error in the way it represents the data visually, but I still would recommend checking it out. That could have been just my personal experience with it, but typically when I can't get data to work, I don't recommend the product. On that note, I will give an exception to the next one. This is Highcharts. Highcharts is an interesting product because what it mainly is a JavaScript library that allows you to take data templates and put your data into it and make it look very nice and dynamic. It's really built for the web and making things easily displayable with complex data sets on the web. And the reason I included it was because it's a different option. A full disclaimer is I am not a JavaScript expert. I know how to read enough JavaScript to know that I do not know JavaScript. So I was not really able to test this to its full potential, but it does have some really cool features to it that I thought were noteworthy and why I wanted to bring it up in this webinar. So any individual usage, any school or any nonprofit can use their full suite for free. So that's really nice because this is a proprietary software with that kind of support, but it's also free for nonprofit schools and individuals. It has an option to do Highcharts, which is Highcharts Cloud, which is a way to make charts very simply and quickly, very similar to Datawrapper. And unlike Datawrapper, there is no view limit to the ones that you make. And it also has a live update functionality, and this is really cool even in the Highcharts cloud, because with your Google Sheets, if you connect to those, any edits you do in Google Sheets will show up in your visualization when you publish it from Highcharts. My biggest downsides is Highcharts Cloud is extremely limited in what it's able to do. It's very similar to Datawrapper, where you don't get to put in input, but you can really mess around with the layout of the data, like how the things display color-wise and font-wise and things like that. To really use Highcharts, you need to know JavaScript, which means that even though it might be a free software, the cost to get individuals who have the skill set to use it might be more prohibitive than going with a more costly upfront like subscription option. But that being said, I mean, with my limited knowledge of JavaScript, I was able to read through the documentation and at least get an understanding of how things worked. And there's enough extensive, the documentation is extensive enough to, if you really want to break into Highcharts, you will be able to get a really good grounding for it. So let me go in and just show you kind of what I mean by Highcharts Cloud, because this is also going to kind of show you what Datawrapper looks like. They have very similar interfaces. All right, so this is Highcharts Cloud. You get started now. Basically, what you can do is, and we're going to use their sample data. And we'll do categorize for series. So what it first does is it kind of gives you a quick look at what a chart would look like with this data. And then you can go into the templates and you can change it to whatever type of chart you think would be best suited for you. And then you can change the themes and customize the chart. And this is where I think Highcharts Cloud put a lot of effort in, is actually the customization of the look of it. And you can go in and put in your own JavaScript code and preview options. And then you can get the publish button, and you can either iframe the information you have, or you can inject the code into your website itself and bring it out and use it for however you want to. My biggest problem with this was the data, like this is a very easy tool to use, but the data cleanup needed to get your data to work in its environments is very difficult. It took me a lot of reading through the documentation to see how to structure my data. And I think the time it takes to clean up the data and make it work in Highcharts Cloud is not worth the time to use it. So unless you're planning your data ahead of time to work with Highcharts, I wouldn't recommend it for existing data sources, unless you have a much better understanding of JavaScript and can use the entire Highcharts suite, and then you may be able to do a lot more. But I was not able to play with the full Highcharts. So it didn't pass my test, and I think that's more down to my inability to interact with it with JavaScript. But it could still be used as a workaround for publishing Excel visuals if it's formatted correctly. And the tool that it beat out, and only barely, and I also recommend checking this out, is D3JS. It's another JavaScript library that is free to use. The reason I picked Highcharts is because for library purposes, it will be free to use, and it has more enterprise support. And also, Highcharts Cloud has the potential to be a good user interface to do data manipulation and use all of the library of the themes that you can really use in Highcharts. So if they build on Highcharts Cloud, and I would kind of keep an eye on this one, if it ends up developing more, maybe it'll become a better and better tool for people to use. I have an honorable mention in Alma Analytics because as librarians, some or most of us might actually be using this at this point. So UB is currently working on testing Alma, and we're in the process of a long migration. So I've been able to really dig into this and try and figure out what's going on. I actually really like the interface with it. I think it's very logical, and it pairs very nicely with the reporting side of it because it's just a second way to manipulate your reports that you're creating into a nice visual. It's powered by Oracle BI, which is an extremely powerful analytical and data storage solution for you. And I'd say it was probably my third option behind Microsoft BI in the Tableau, Microsoft, and Oracle BI kind of area. So you get that power of Oracle BI with it. It allows for user interaction, and that by what I mean by that is it allows for people who also are working in Alma to interact with the data and have dashboards that they can keep up and pop up on their computers, and you can get a lot of information. It has a lot of functionality for getting important statistics on acquisitions and things like that for your ACRL statistics. And so far, it's been pretty successful at doing that as long as the data is input correctly. I also like that you can export these reports to PDF, Excel, or PowerPoint if you need to make a presentation. And the dashboard creatability is pretty good. There's a couple of downsides to using Alma Analytics. First, if you want to make a report that's over 250,000 records, you're not going to be able to. And also, if you export things to Excel, I think the limit's at around 64,000 rows that it'll actually give you. So for the data side, but for the visualization side, it's pretty good. So let me give you like a sample visual of what you might be looking at in this if you haven't seen it. Apologies for what I have. It's just I wasn't able to actually pull in a graph from Alma Analytics, so I just put in a sample graph in the middle. So you'd have a graph in the middle. The top would be the toolbar, where you can select the type of graph you want. And I think the thing I like most about this is there's a specific area for graph prompts, which means that it's user focused and has an area where it's easy to identify where you want the user to be interacting with it. So although it's not as intuitive with rows and columns as Tableau and stuff, I'd say it's relatively intuitive. And because you'll be interacting in analytics, if you have that permission, you'll be more used to the quirks of the layout of Oracle BI's backup data, and it'll be easier to manipulate. But I think in general, it's a pretty good intuitive design. So let me go to the next slide. And this is kind of my bonus thing. So OpenRefine is a really interesting tool for data cleanup. It used to be a Google product, and then Google got rid of it, as they do with a lot of things, like Google Plus is gone now. But a group of people have kept it going, and it's an open source, really light download. And what you can do is use it to either transport data from different file types. You can use it to clean up your data, and it's a really cool tool. And I just kind of wanted to bring it to your attention. If you are having issues with data cleanup, this is a really nice tool, and there's a decent amount of videos on YouTube. And if you go to OpenRefine link that I've got up top, it'll show you some introductory videos on how to use it, but it's just a nice tool to think about. So basically, in my opinion, the best all-around tools that you're going to have are Tableau and Excel. Your best free options are Highcharts and Google Data Studio. I really think Google Data Studio might be one of the most impressive things I've come across recently. I really recommend checking it out. Highcharts I think is interesting, but I just don't have a use for it and don't really interact with it enough, but it might be much more powerful and much easier to use than I think it is, because at least to people who are in web design or know JavaScript. Datawrapper is really cool for doing charts in a pinch, and I think it does visuals a little bit better than Highcharts initially, but you have to deal with the fact that you only get 10,000 views on it. So now I would like to open it up to questions.
Great, thanks, Reed. This has been a really awesome session. And as Reed said, we do now have time for questions. So if you have not yet done so, please type your questions into the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel there on your screen. And so we did get some early on, so we'll start with those. The first is we have an attendee who'd like to hear more about the exportability of the graphics, specifically in terms of HTML5.
So with, let's see if I could do this through all of them. With Excel, my biggest problem is that to export it to HTML takes a lot of massaging, and I don't do it very often, so I don't have like a set of instructions for it. For Tableau, you can publish it to your server and then link it to where you want to go. Google Data Studio has an embedding function, so you can iframe your data so it's stored at Google, but you're actually seeing it on the website. And that is the same for Highcharts and Datawrapper, I think. So it's usually like the way to incorporate it into your website is through iframe, but Highcharts also, because it's a JavaScript library, I think you can embed it very much easier into your website as its own thing.
Great, thanks. And then we have one back from the beginning, just talk about the types of data that we have in our spreadsheets. Can you clarify the difference between sum and count?
Sure. So sum is actually adding the numbers together. So like it's like what 5 and 4 is 9. Count would be how many times data is entered inside that field. So say you have 24 rows of data and 23 of them have data in it, then you get a count of 23. And then let me just go further with count distinct. Count distinct will count the distinct number of times, or the number of times there is distinct data in a field. So if you have 3 5s, it only count as 1.
Great, thanks. We have a question about Tableau, the free version. Is the free version really limiting, or is it actually usable, especially for someone who's new to it?
Oh, it's a great way to get used to Tableau. It's just not good for enterprise stuff. And you can keep all your stuff on Tableau, your own Tableau like login. I think it's a great tool to really get used to, and I use it sometimes when I'm dealing with data that I don't care about, just to practice on, because I know I can't interfere with any of the data processes we have internally at my university.
Okay, great. And then was one, do you use all of these tools, and can you give some examples of the different kinds of library statistics you would be presenting with each one?
So the 3 tools that I would use and the 2 tools that I do use regularly are Excel and Tableau. For Excel, I use that for statistics that we're taking manually. Sometimes we do like gate counts and stuff, and that's just data entry from students. So I'll get a data set like that, and then I can do visuals and try and figure out based on like time, when peak months and stuff like that are, based on the data that we're getting there. I use Tableau for Iliad data because we can connect directly to the server, and it's a very intuitive tool. We like using it because we have our own like Tableau server that we can publish all our stuff on and make it easily available to the public, which is a little bit more difficult to do in Excel to make it like web accessible. So anything that's like bigger data, I use Tableau, and anything that's smaller and like specific reporting, I try and use Excel. I think Highcharts would be for bigger data. Google Data Studio, I'm not really sure how I would use it because I don't think I'd want to give Data Studio like access to enterprise data, but I'd use it for smaller, more Excel-like things, or maybe even an access database, depending on what information is there. And Datawrapper would be like just in a quick pinch if I really needed to do a visual, and I guess like this would be more if I was starting off and I didn't know how to manipulate visuals as quickly and as efficiently as I do now. I would try Datawrapper to see if it could just do it for me, or Highcharts Cloud.
All right, great. Next one, have you done any visualizations related to serials such as e-journals or databases, etc.?
Yes, I try to do that through Alma Analytics a little bit because we're testing our data. The big problem that I've had, and maybe we're just too early on in testing with that, is we're more making sure that the data is correct than if the visuals work really well. I'd say, like, if you're using Alma Analytics for design, it's good for showing simple visualizations, but if you're trying to get more and more complex with them, it tends to lag behind. But I mean, if you have that information in analytics and you create it as just a report, there is an API into Tableau where you can get Alma Analytics reports into Tableau, so you could do serial and e-journal visualizations in that. But more specific, like it also depends on what you're trying to look for, because I've mostly been trying to do searching for what's wrong or what might be input incorrectly at this point.
Okay, next one is, what's the easiest way to start playing with data viz if you're really new to it?
I think Tableau Public is a great place to start, and also I would try and do multiple. So I would say if you do Google Data Studio and Tableau to try and get two different styles together, it's really easy to drag and drop and play around with, and you don't have to worry about breaking the data. Kaggle.com, I linked it in my last video. It has free data sets, and Google Data Studio has a connector that you can connect directly to Kaggle for their data. And that's a really good way to play around because it's data that you don't have to worry about. And if it breaks, you just start new.
All right. If you cancel your Tableau subscription someday, would you lose all of your graphics?
That I do not think. I don't think you would lose your existing graphics. I think you just lose the functionality. Unfortunately, I don't really control the Tableau account. I'm more of a user, so I can't give you a very intelligent answer now, but I can write out a more intelligent answer later when I have that information in front of me.
Okay, thank you. And does Tableau have good kind of instructional videos or good instructions on their site, or can you suggest going anywhere else for that?
Yeah, so Tableau has its own tutorial videos that you have to give an email address to access, but they're very good. You can also, I mean, YouTube's a really good source, and I've used that a lot for figuring out specific things for Tableau. And their documentation itself is pretty good. And the Tableau community is also another good place to go. But I would say their videos, like off the Tableau website, are very good at getting you up and running. All you have to do is like sign up with an email address to use Tableau.
All right, great, thank you. So that will actually wrap up our Q&A. That was our last question. So thank you so much, Reed. We are glad that all of you could be with us today. Sorry for the pause there. You will soon receive a short online evaluation form. So if you could please take a few minutes to respond to those questions. Your comments are very valuable and do help the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee plan future events. The email will also include links to today's slides and recording, and you now have the opportunity to receive a certificate of attendance. That information will also be available in the email. So thanks again to our presenter, Reed Jones, and thanks also to members of the Continuing Education Committee, Iping Chengathy and Dana Hanford, and to Alana Warren from the ALCTS office. The support they provide make it possible for us to present these webinars. ALCTS does have other continuing education events coming up. The next webinar is on November 28th, covering current developments in name authorities, as well as 2 more webinars through the remainder of 2018. Please see the ALCTS website to register or find more information on these. And ALCTS also offers web courses, which are 4 to 6 weeks long, as well as 2-day email discussions. Our next e-forum will be on December 11th, discussing migrating technical services and systems, services, and staff. Check the website for more information on upcoming courses and discussions. So thank you all for joining us today, and this will conclude our session.